audiences want to see things that are new. I want to go see a story I've never seen before, and that's what we're betting on.
A good story will work across the globe. I know that. I'm pretty much sure about it.
There's this powerful sense that the audience want to connect to each other and connect to story.
It's such a nice spectrum of voices. There's something for everyone. Everyone loves Toronto and everyone loves TIFF.
As you join us today, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on and its history. We're located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're grateful to work on this land.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are not tired of me yet. It is, I'm not sure what day it is. I think it's day 3, day 4. My name is Jeff McNunn. I'm the Senior Director of Theatrical and Industry here at TIFF. I'm also the lead programmer of Prime Time. Our industry programming is made possible by the support of our sponsors and our partners. We'd like to thank our major sponsors, Bell, RBC, Bulgari, and Visa, and our major industry supporters, Ontario Creates and Telefilm Canada. Big thanks to our media partner for all of our dialogues, which is Variety. It is my pleasure to introduce and moderate our next session titled Dialogues with Directors Cord Jefferson and Lulu Wang. Cord Jefferson was born in Tucson. He's an Emmy Award-winning writer, story editor, whose television credits include some of the best series to grace our screens over the last 10 years. Those include Master of None, Watchmen, The Good Place, and Succession. American Fiction is his feature film debut, which premiered last night. If you missed it, there's another public screening tonight and on Thursday, as well as a press and industry screening tomorrow. So please check it out. Lulu Wang was born in Beijing and grew up in Miami. She wrote and directed the feature films Posthumous and The Farewell. Expats is her latest project, and she premiered the stunning penultimate episode titled Central yesterday. Both projects are incredible. You need to see them. So please join me in welcoming Cord and Lulu to the stage. How does it feel to be through the hardest part? You've premiered it to the world. How do you feel today?
Relieved and tired, but happy.
I feel the same way, yeah, very, very relieved. Very relieved, very exhausted.
I was hoping we could kind of start the conversation by setting it up a bit. If there's any time throughout the conversation where you have questions for each other, feel free to ask and jump in. There'll be time at the end for audience questions as well. But I think one thing that's similar about these projects is they're both adaptations. Expats is an adaptation of Janice Y.K. Lee's The Expatriates, and American Fiction is an adaptation of Percival Everett's Eraser. Starting maybe with Cord, what was it about Everett's novel that excited you most about its kind of cinematic potential?
I don't know if anybody's ever felt this way, but when I read the book, it just felt like it was a gift written for me personally. There was a lot of similarities. I don't want to sort of spoil anything if people haven't seen it, but there's a lot of similarities between the lead character's personal life and my personal life. There was a lot of conversations that he was having about identity and race in the book that I was having with my friends and colleagues, and it just felt, it felt like a good first movie to try to make because I knew that I could make it cheaply. I knew that I didn't have to go into anybody's office and say, I need $40 million, and I haven't directed anything, and I've never written a movie, so, but I think it'll go well, so I knew that I could sort of go in and ask for a relatively small sum of money, but make a movie that I felt like, you know, small budget, but big ideas, and so it feels like it's, you know, hopefully punching above its weight class when it comes to sort of like a movie of this budget. So it just felt like a good first project.
And Lulu, what about you and that kind of connection to the expatriates?
Similarly, yeah, when I read the novel, I felt like it was an intersection of so many of my worlds. I grew up in the US as a Chinese immigrant, but then when I go back to Hong Kong, I'm an American expat, and you know, do you relate more to the privileged class of expats? Do you relate more to the locals? You know, it's very complicated when you are a person in diaspora, and that's what the novel explores. And for me, after the farewell, I saw this as a way to expand my scope, was to tell a bigger story, and with Nicole Kidman's support, you know, really have the resources to be able to tackle a larger world and more complexities and nuances.
So we're talking a little bit about the excitement of the adaptation process, but I was curious because I think we have a lot of emerging filmmakers in the audience, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit those initial fears in terms of, you know, you're set to adapt these novels, and obviously you want to do them justice, but I'm guessing as well you want to make them your own as creators. And I was wondering if you could talk about kind of some of those fears or early anxieties that you had as creators.
Yeah, I mean, the fear is that you're going to do what the cliche of, like, everybody's going to leave the theater saying, well, the book was way better than the movie. That was terrible. I mean, that is really, you're going to destroy this piece of literature that people love. It's, you know, especially Percival. Percival has some really rabid fans, and you know, reasonably so. I think he's like a legitimate living genius, and he's just a wonderful writer. And so that to me was the most frightening screening that I did for the movie was not with Jeffrey Wright, it was with Percival. Percival came to my house and watched a cut with his wife Danzy before we were actually done with the movie, and I was just drenched in sweat by the time it was over. And you know, the nicest thing that he said is, which is something you brought up, was that he said, you know, the thing that I like about it is that it feels like you made it your own. It feels like unique and separate. He said it feels like a different piece of art, and that to me was the highest praise that I could get.
Amazing. Lulu, what about fears or anxieties that you had early on?
Yeah, you know, I think whenever I take on a project, I always ask this question of why this story, why now, and why me? And am I the right person to tell the story? And Janice's best-selling novel was so beloved. She's Korean American, and she was an expat in Hong Kong. It was her personal experience. It's set in Hong Kong, which is a place that I'm not from. And so I had to really, I was really anxious about whether or not I was the right person to be telling the story. And I think that it helped me to bring those questions into the work itself, because, you know, I am an outsider to Hong Kong, but I'm also, you know, from Beijing in 1989. My family and I left in 1989, so there's a lot of parallels politically. And I am also an expat and expats as a series, and expats themselves are outsiders. And so I ultimately think that those questions, it's important to have fears, you know? I think that those fears drive you to be more thoughtful and to try to do your best. And whether you succeed or fail, I think those efforts are really important to be asking those questions. And it's the reason, and you know, with TV it's different because you have a writer's room, why I also brought Janice into the fold, because I was able to include different voices and voices of people who had more direct relationships to Hong Kong.
And in an interesting way, you know, Cord, this is your first, feature film. Lulu, this is your first series. And I'm sure you're both used to, a different creative process and a different writing process early on. How did you approach this project either differently, or how did you bring past experiences into this process, into a different medium, to either make you feel more comfortable or at the same time challenge yourself on the other side of things? I don't know, Lulu, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know how to make something other than the way that I've made them, and that I know how to make things, I guess, if that makes sense, right? And I brought this, it was really important that I could bring the same team, all of my collaborators from The Farewell onto this series, and we shot it like a film. I didn't know how to, I directed all 6 episodes, and my whole team and I just came into it, shooting it in the same way. Like we didn't change our process simply because of the medium. And I think that was important, just to, kind of always keep our style. Like we couldn't just suddenly change our way of directing or cinematography just because it was this different format, unless we felt it was important for that format. And so it was great to have that kind of support, even though we were changing mediums, that we could still really make sure we were keeping our voice in it.
And I think that for me, one of the things that I really love about television is that the sort of like prolonged time of it allows you to really get into characters and just sort of like really meet these human beings in a very, incredibly layered and in-depth way, because you're with them for so long, particularly, I think that there's a reason that shows like The Office are so beloved, and it's because people spent literally a decade of their life with those characters, and they start to feel like, oh, these are my friends. And so I think that for me, that is one of the appeals of TV, and it's something that I really wanted to keep in mind when I came to film, because I think when you come to film and you have this very contained thing and you have 2 hours or less to tell a story, you can start to rely on sort of plot, moving things forward, and sort of like you need to wrap this up and tell a complete thing, and you might sort of like shunt the character stuff to the side. And so when I sat down and started to write, I just wanted to make sure that all of the characters felt nuanced and layered and complex in the same way that they do on television. Because to me, that's always what I appreciate. Like, I'm just much more of I want an intimate character study more so than I want sort of like a crazy plot. And so I think that just a commitment to character and just staying in that area when I wrote was probably the biggest thing in my mind that I brought over from TV.
I have many questions, actually, jumping off a couple of these points, but one of them, Lulu, you mentioned the idea of, this is the way you know how to work, and you wanted to kind of surround yourself with, the people that have worked on The Farewell and this amazing team that kind of is your kind of safe space in some ways, that, you have a short form with them, and they know exactly what you want, and you know what they want out of it. Cord, in terms of developing your team on this, in many occasions you're part of a team, in the writer's room, etc. But in this scenario, you're, developing your own team. What was that process like for your first feature?
It was really thrilling. I think that that's one of the things that I love most about our jobs. I used to be a journalist for about 10 years before I started working in film and television, and I really liked that part of my life, and I really liked the work that I was doing, but writing had become to me a very solitary exercise. It was very much me sitting alone in my room and working on stuff, and then sometimes talking to an editor, but that was it. And so when I started working in TV and I saw all the collaboration that goes on, and sort of like all of these great artists that you surround yourself with to make stuff, I was really, really excited by that. So the opportunity to go and find, I hear Lulu say, like, she wanted to work with her team from The Farewell and sort of like stay with those people. I really was excited to find people I could potentially just collaborate with for the rest of my life. And I feel like I did that. It was so going into those meetings was really, really thrilling, and because I felt like, oh, this is somebody that I could potentially work with for the next 50 years. That's how I sort of went into all those conversations, and I do feel that way. I feel like I found some people that I'm going to work with for the rest of my life. It was really thrilling.
Amazing. And Lulu, as much as you had kind of a core group surrounding you for this project, you were also working with people you hadn't worked with before, including executive producer and actress Nicole Kidman. What was that experience in terms of working closely with her and her co-producers as well on that?
Yeah, I think that what I love about television is, as Cord said, it's incredibly collaborative, and the scope of it, you jump through all these different, you can jump timelines, you can jump perspectives, and working with Nicole, what was so wonderful is her support in, one, allowing me to have and helping me to make sure that I could bring on my team, because none of us had any TV experience. We hadn't done something of this scale. There was a bunch of effects and, the size of the cast. We were shooting in, multiple continents. And just allowing me to pitch, how I saw things and supporting and on how she thought it would be best, the kind of team that would be best to do that. Yeah, and I really, really felt that, because there are so many perspectives, it's important to have, and I used to be a pianist, so talk about being like, a very lonely artist, and then, and then in making a film, you're writing alone in a room, and I'd never been in a writer's room before, and so that was another fear of like, how am I gonna run a writer's room when I've never been in one? And it just felt so natural. It was the most incredible time because there was 5 of us and it was 5 women, and for 3 months, and we just talked, and it felt like therapy, and everybody had a very different life experience and different traumas, and we were joking last night that literally some of those traumas were happening during the room, and people would come in to share them and be crying, and we'd be like, that's so terrible, I'm so sorry. But also, can we put it in the show? Because this is actually perfect. And they'd be like crying and be like, okay, yeah, it is perfect, So, I mean, that is such a beautiful thing, because when you're writing alone, you don't have that interaction and that constant feedback.
And with the writers' rooms that you've been in before, Cord, what makes a good writer's room in your mind?
A great writer's room, I think, is you choose a great writer's room the way that you choose a great baseball team, I think, which is that not everybody can be a pitcher, because that will be a terrible baseball team. And so what you want is, I think that, one of the writer's rooms that I worked in longest is for the show called The Good Place, and it was the, created by Mike Schur, who before that had worked on The Office and created Parks and Rec, and so he had brought a bunch of Parks and Rec writers over with him, and so when I started on Good Place in season 2, and so I was incredibly intimidated by the people there because I really respected their work, and I remember the first day going in and being terrified because it's a comedy show, and I'm in there with improv people and stand-up comedians and people who've written on, on Saturday Night Live and really wanted to be comedy writers since they were kids. And I came in there sort of with this background in journalism. I don't consider myself a comedy writer necessarily, but I think that I can write jokes, but I'm not like the kind of person who can come up with the zingers off the top of my head and just sort of like shout out punchlines. And I was in the room with a few people who could do that, and it was incredibly intimidating. But eventually I realized that I wasn't there to do that. That sort of Mike had hired people to do that, and so he had those bases covered. And what he expected out of me was, I think that I'm really good with story and character, and sort of that's a show that requires a lot of thinking about philosophy and ethics. And there's a lot of puzzle pieces for the complexity of that show. And I realized that that's why I'm here to sort of help on that area. And I think that it's if you can do everything, if you can do it all, then more power to you. But I think the sort of reality is that most people can't do it all. And so, you sort of like pick and choose, like, oh, this person's really excellent with a story, this person's really excellent with dialogue, this person's really funny, this person has a great lived experience that we can sort of like tap into for this specific character. And it's just, you start putting together a stable of varied talents as opposed to just, you know, a few people who all do the same thing.
And I was wondering, on, you know, both of your experiences, like writing and collaborating in that way, even if it's the greatest writer's room in the world, there's got to be difficult conversations that you need to have. And I was wondering, you know, with you both kind of taking the lead on these projects, how do you prepare yourselves for those difficult conversations? And because they can't be fun, but they're needed in the process, I'm sure. I don't know, Lulu, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm, first of all, somebody, immigrant family, like never strayed away from being, we're not conflict avoidant, I'll put it that way. You know, we're very confrontational about everything, like even like dinner. So, and then, you know, and just in putting together the room, one of the first people I brought in was one of my best friends, who's a tremendous writer and director, Vera Miao. And I was like, oh, she and I she's also not conflict avoidant. I don't know. And so, you know, and then when we had the room, we had to really just push to go there. I mean, for just as an example, you know, there was a moment where we were talking about one of the characters and filling in the backstory, and we were like, you know, sometimes in these rooms, everybody just assumes that everybody's liberal and, you know, open-minded. And what if his family, you know, what if they're Republicans? What if they, you know, are from here? And what college did he go into? And we got in this really heated debate about, like, you know, whether or not, you know, this character's father voted for Trump and what did he think? And we were like, we can't put that. We don't support this or that. And then, you know, at one point, Vera was like, why, we've been doing this for like 6 hours. Like, does it really matter where he went to college? Like, you know, but it's like, sometimes you need to do that. You need to go off the main path that you're on and have those debates, even if it doesn't end up in the script, because it tests your relationship, like any relationship, right? Can you come back from that? Can you still collaborate, even if you see things differently? And can you ultimately, you know, find what you're trying to say through all of that?
You know, it was funny that you brought up crying in the writer's room. I was going to say, I don't think people have any idea how much crying goes on in writer's rooms.
It's like therapy.
Yeah. It is. I did not imagine I'd see so many people crying when I started getting into television. But it is, you know, I don't want to sound twee, and I sort of like hate when people talk so grandly about this stuff, and I know that I'm about to do exactly what I hate, but I do think that a writer's room is kind of a sacred space. It is a place where you need to go in and just feel comfortable saying the weirdest thing that you think, and or the sort of like craziest opinion that you have. Like it's a place to sort of discuss ideas, and that's one of the reasons why I think that I love it so much. Is I grew up in a very weird household where my father's a black Republican and my mother was a very liberal white woman, and they had very differing opinions about the world, and there was no easy answers. And there was constant debates at the dinner table, almost frustratingly so, where it's like, I'm like 12, I don't want to talk about this, man. I don't want to talk about, you know, the war. I just want to talk about cartoons. And so, but it's, you know, it forced me to sort of like be a little confrontational and have my own opinions and think for myself from a young age. And I think that, so going to a place like a writer's room where all you do is talk about opinions and ideas and personality traits and what makes an interesting human being and what would be an interesting story, that was, you know, it was like catnip for me. I loved it. And I also think that something that you said that's important is you know, being in a collaborative space, even on a film, you know, it's not a writer's room, but you're still collaborating with a ton of people. And I think that being in that collaborative space allows you to feel safer when you're making these decisions, when you're having these intense conversations. Because like, if you're just sitting there thinking to yourself, like, is this crazy? Is this too much? Am I going too hard in this area? You know, when you're just sitting there by yourself, it's terrifying because you have no idea, and there's sort of something thrilling about that. But it's also nice to have the hive mind of a bunch of people who can say, you know, I think you need to pull back here a little bit. This is a little off the rails, or like, are you sure you're making the correct point, or the point that you're trying to make with this? I think that maybe that point's gonna get lost amid the controversy around this thing that you're saying. So I just think that working with those people, it just does feel far safer when you're talking about these kinds of like third rail issues that are coming up in I think both of the things that we worked on.
It's so interesting because I've never been in a writer's room, but it feels like this, you know, microcosm of, you know, what any, you know, well-working organization should be doing is having these healthy conversations in these rooms and creating that space to have them. And I think in Canada, it's funny, there's this like perception that, you know, all Canadians are nice, and that we're all kind of like, yeah, we'll have whatever he's having, or yeah, sure, yeah, that's a good idea, let's all do that. But many times, and I will say this from my experience, you know, it's like, you know, cutting through, talking about the elephants in the room gets you closer to success, whatever that success looks like in whatever field you're in. I'm very curious in terms of, and I've asked this to other guests before, and I'm curious of what your takes are. Obviously, writing is not the only part of this journey, and I'm wondering, between, you know, writing, pre-production, post-production itself, do you have a favorite part of the overall experience of kind of that creation journey?
I will say that I love writing for television. I really, really appreciate all the experiences I've had. It's been a delight, but you know, so much of television is you know, driving onto whatever lot you're on and sitting in a writer's room for 8 hours and ordering a salad from Jones on 3rd that's way too expensive, and then you're like sitting in air conditioning all day, and then you leave at 6 p.m. and you go home, and that's your job, and it's great, and I love it, but I also felt removed from the process. You know, you feel removed from the final thing because you're just so much of your work is just done in an air-conditioned room all day, you know? And I think that when I got out to, we shot part of the film in a beach town in Massachusetts, and when we got there, the sort of the grips had their area, and they hoisted up this big pirate flag on the beach, and they're like sitting over there rolling cigarettes, and it was kind of like there's just like they're all just rolling cigarettes and smoking all day, and like they're saying the weirdest stuff, and like and like I just realized, like, oh, this is like I feel like I'm in it now. Like I feel like I'm in it making something with like other human beings. It doesn't feel like I'm just isolated in this ivory tower over here where I sort of like I'm never actually involved in the process of actually making the thing. And obviously the script is a huge part of the thing, but like I'm not sort of like, it just felt like I was removed and not getting my hands dirty. And so I think that being on set, as you know, demanding as it is, and the late nights that you have, and exhausting, and you're cold, and you're rainy, and you're exposed to the elements, I just think that to me was something that I was really missing. I was just really missing getting into it and getting my hands dirty and like feel like I'm making something with a bunch of people, as opposed to just, you know, sending an email of my script and saying like, okay, good luck.
The soft writer's hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Lulu, what is your favorite part of the whole process for you?
You know, I love being on set. I really like come to life on set. I have so much fun traveling, being in a different part of the world. So much of my research comes from the prep process. I always like to live in the place that I'm shooting for a while, and many of those research elements end up back in the script. But for this, maybe because it was my first writer's room, and our writer's room was nothing like what you're describing, and maybe it's because I'd never run a writer's room before and I did it wrong.
3 pictures.
Many of my writers who've been in writer's room definitely were like, this is not a normal writer's room, don't get used to this. You know, we did not sit in AC. We, you know, we're in Culver City. We'd go out and get bubble tea whenever, you know, we felt like we needed. We would, you know, have, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but once in a while, very rare while, we would have, you know, gin and tonics late in the afternoon. And I think just for me, I'd just come off of this press tour, and it was such a whirlwind after doing The Farewell, and that film was so small and so personal, had gone wider than I expected, and there was something so overwhelming about that, where I was so worried that I was gonna lose my voice. I didn't know, you know, what I was gonna do next, and I really feel like that the writer's room saved me, because to go back and sort of just face myself in a blank page was terrifying in the midst of still doing press. But being able to go into a room while I was still doing press and awards and all this stuff really grounded me. And I think my soul, like my spirit, was really just craving deeper conversations, because when you're doing these like press tours and stuff, you're just kind of hitting talking points and going, and there's not a lot of time and space to really go deep with people. And our world in general these days, you know, there's social media, and it can just be very frenetic. And so when we were in the room, it was like, you know, phones off, and we were just really with each other and got to know each other so well. And it was a group of women. And so I think that there was just something really nourishing and magical about that time. And when I look back on what we shot and executed, so much of it is exactly what we envisioned in the room, and that's really special to see that we had a blueprint that was so strong that it took us all the way to the end.
So I asked about your favorite part of it. What is your least favorite part of it? And I won't be insulted if you say, you know, conversations like this after the premiere, early in the morning.
No, I will say that I'm in the midst of the least favorite part of it right now, and it has nothing to do with you or TIFF. I'm loving this. I'm loving all of this, but I am in the midst of, I've been working on this thing for years now, and it's been very special to me. To me, it's the most important thing I've ever done in my professional life, and I have such deep emotions about it. It's a really important film for me, and I made such close friends working on it, like people, like I said, that I hope to work with for the rest of my life, and we've sort of like, I just collaborated with people I really love on this art project, which I'm very proud of. And now I'm in the midst of this transformational moment where my art project that I love so much is now a commodity, and it's a product, and now I need to sell it. And that's been the hardest part for me. Is like it goes from being this art project that I love, that I worked on with my friends for years, to like, okay, now it's a product, and now you need to sell it and get people to come see it. And I think I totally understand that. I understand the necessity of that. This is a business at the end of the day, and people want to feed their families and make money. I understand all of that, but it is this interesting paradigm shift that I don't think I was necessarily prepared for. Of like, oh yeah, it's never just going to be like an art project that you're just like, oh yeah, wasn't this fun? And we can all go home now and work on something else. It was kind of like, oh no, now this is in the world, and it becomes a commodity, and that is probably the hardest part for me, because I don't consider myself a natural salesman. That's not a. When I played soccer when I was a kid, they used to make us sell candy bars at the mall. I still don't understand that. It's the craziest thing. They used to put me in my soccer uniform and go sell candy bars at the mall. I remember thinking, like, this is stupid. Why do we have to do this? And I was horrible at it. I was too scared. Everybody just walked past me, and my mom ended up doing all the work anyway and selling all the candy bars, because I was just so embarrassed and intimidated. And so, yeah, I feel that way now. Like, every time I'm trying to sell the movie, I just am back to being an 11-year-old in my soccer uniform, like standing in front of a Dillard's, asking people to please like me and buy my candy bar.
At least you were like probably a cute kid selling candy bars. In college, to make money, I signed up for that pyramid scheme of selling knives. So, you know, and they like make you like sell it to friends of family and friends because it was like a pyramid scheme. And so I'd have like a backpack full of knives, and I went to this like my friend's grandma's house, and she was like 98 years old, and I was trying to sell her a knife that like. I was like, it's a lifetime guarantee, and you can cut through a penny, and I'm like trying to cut through the penny, and she's, so I know how you feel.
Besides the pain of selling knives, what is your least favorite part? Is it similar or is it different, Lulu?
I would say every project's probably very different. On this particular project, I wouldn't say it was my least favorite, but I'll say what was the most challenging is the length of it. And, you know, with a series, it has to both work as parts as well as the sum of its whole. And particularly, I have this one episode that's a feature-length episode, and that I always knew I wanted to screen at a festival, and I needed it to work both as on its own for people who hadn't seen the whole series, but I also wanted people who were seeing the series in order to not felt like it was repetitive information. And then just the overall length of it, I think that I struggled a lot with, over the course of that many shooting days, the stamina of making sure that we weren't just like, all right, just get it, you know, it's day 67 and like everybody's exhausted, so today this shot is good enough. Whereas on a 26-day shoot, which is what the farewell was, you're exhausted, of course, but it's so short, so you're just like, I just got to get to the end. It's only a couple more days left, and we were able to really fight in that way. And with this kind of length, I was worried that I was losing the thread, you know, because we're also shooting things out of order. And so we're shooting like, you know, 80 days in, we're shooting like the first scene or, you know, scenes from the first episode, but we'd already shot this thing, but then the second episode is a year earlier than the first episode, you know, so there's just so many things to keep track of. And at the end, and you're not editing throughout. We are editing, but I didn't really have time to like watch everything, and so I just had to really rely on my editors to tell me, okay, it's working, and it is, and you have to trust that at the end of, you know, over 100 days of shooting, that you're gonna end up with something that feels cohesive.
You mentioned earlier location and you know doing rewrites on location and all of those things, and I think location is so important, I think, to both of your projects. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about location, but also how, you know, your identities as creators are now connected to the locations that you were shooting on and telling your stories on. I don't know, Lulu, if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've never made a film. I made a short film, but I've never made any of my works, longer works in America. And so when I did my first feature in Berlin, I lived there for 3 years, researching and just trying to get the project off the ground. And then I obviously made a film that's in my grandma's hometown. Now with Hong Kong, I was there for about a year, if not longer. And yeah, and you feel that that place is part of you because you were living there. You've left your family, you know, and especially because we were there during the pandemic, we were not able to leave. You know, we were all doing these extreme 21-day quarantines multiple times to be there. And for me, because place is a character in the stories that I tell, I do feel deeply connected, and I think it's such like an intense time when you're, and it's weird because you're not living the life of a normal person when you're in that place, but I always try to find moments, you know, whether it's during prep or on weekends, to just be a person in that place and be an observer. But it's one of my favorite things about being a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that we went to Hong Kong. I was in Boston.
I went to school in Boston.
I was in Boston, Massachusetts, and I didn't stay in Boston. I actually stayed in a place called Braintree, Massachusetts, at the Residence Inn. And also because it was COVID, I didn't really do anything because I knew that we had such limited time and money, and the actors' schedules were so sort of like they were scheduled within like an hour of the time that they needed to leave to go to the airport to work on something else. And so I knew that if we got shut down for COVID even one day, the possibility was that like the entire thing would unravel because all of a sudden we'd lose this actor and this person would go away and we didn't have the money. So I essentially went to set and went home, and that's it. And I went back to the Residence Inn in Braintree, and sometimes I would order a very sad dinner from Burger King, I remember one of the most depressing nights is I was already asleep and I got a phone call that my Burger King was there. And it was 10:30 and I went downstairs and I got my Impossible Whopper. And I ate 3 bites of it in bed and I was like, this is disgusting. I woke up to a half-eaten cold Whopper on my bedside table the next morning. So I didn't really have much of a life. I think that Boston, though, you know, I'd been to Boston a little bit. I think that it was interesting. So I initially wrote the movie for New York, but New York was going to be way too expensive. So we started looking at other places. We're like, what's a town that there might reasonably be a literature scene, that there'd be a book agent might live there, and you might have a writer come from here, and so we decided on Boston, and you know, Boston, I don't know if you guys know up here that Boston has a very fraught racial history. You know, the people always talk about Boston being the most racist city in the North, and that it's had, you know, a lot of racial issues. And so it turned out that I actually really enjoyed shooting a story about a black family living in Boston, just because I think that it's so iconically, especially in film, like Irish or Italian, you know, those are the movies that you see come out of Boston. And you don't really see stories about black people there. And so I realized that, like, oh, there is a black community in Boston. You know, there are black people there, and you just kind of they kind of get glossed over when you're looking at the sort of, you know, the drone shots of Fenway Park and the duck boats, you know, and Harvard. It just felt like, oh, this is an interesting. It just felt like it became an interesting environment for the story for the backdrop of this black family, and it just felt like, you know, the goal is to hopefully, you know, shoot a group of people that you don't necessarily see before, and it turned out that Boston was a perfect place for that because it is so rare to focus on the black community in that city.
I have one more question. We're going to go to audience for questions, so please prepare some questions. Before I go further, apologies to Burger King, one of our partners. No, I'm totally. I will say that the dinner was very sad, but I love the Impossible Whopper. It is
sponsored by Burger King.
It is the only fast food chain in the United States that serves Impossible Burgers. McDonald's does not have a single veggie burger. They're losing so much money. I would eat so much McDonald's if they had a veggie burger. They do not. And so I went to the Impossible Whopper. It was the context in which I was eating it. It was not the Whopper itself.
Well, I still feel very bad for you because we had such amazing food in Hong Kong. I mean, the crew, like, someone on the crew would always surprise us and be like, today I'm doing delivery and we're gonna have a late night stack of dumplings and shumai and dim sum night, and here's a street food cart that is outside when you get a break in between takes, go outside, between setups, yeah.
I will also, that was not my experience, and then And on top of it, there was also a triple stabbing one night in the lobby of the Braintree Residence Inn, where apparently four Russian men who were there together got into a huge argument. One of them stabbed the other three and then fled into the woods. They never found him.
Well, Lulu, you sold your knives to the wrong people, obviously.
Yes. It's my fault, I'm sorry.
My last question, we were talking about how hard it was to kind of schedule cast on your side of things. Obviously, you're working on a short schedule. Both of your projects have incredible cast associated to the projects. I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about the casting process and really finding your leads who are incredible in both of your works.
Yeah, I started reading the novel with Jeffrey Wright in mind. I started reading the character Monk in Jeffrey's voice. That's how sort of like early I knew that I wanted Jeffrey to play Monk. And so he was the first person that we went to when the script was done, and it very much, I didn't know what I was going to do if he said no. And fortunately, to his credit, I think that some people talk the talk about sort of like, trying to help underrepresented voices and sort of like marginalized voices and people who haven't gotten an opportunity in film and television. But I think that few of them sort of like walk the walk in a real way. And Jeffrey Wright, who is, one of, in my opinion, the greatest living actors in America and in the world, and I think the sort of like really singular talent for him to, this guy was in Angels in America on Broadway, and he was, Basquiat, and he's in Batman, he's in 007, like he's doing these massive movies with massive budgets, these Wes Anderson movies, and I think that for him to sort of have the ability to take those roles as he wishes, to come to turn to me and say, and I'm saying, like, look, I've never directed anything, I've never written a movie, but will you trust me to like go along with me on this, because I love your work and I think you'd be great in it. For him to sort of say like, okay, I'm gonna trust this guy who's totally has never done this before and is when I could probably be working on a different Wes Anderson movie if I wanted to, that meant a lot to me. It meant the world to me, and it's truly, I am indebted to him forever, because once Jeffrey signed on, everything became easier. Everything, like just getting other actors interested became easier, getting the financiers interested for more money became easier, because it really was like, oh, this is a serious movie now, because this is a really good actor, and we sort of were banking on it being better than we thought it was going to be because he got this. So I truly feel, I will be forever indebted to Jeffrey Wright for that.
And he is incredible in it, I must say.
Thanks. He's amazing. He's an amazing man.
And Lulu, the casting process on your side, I think you, in addition to Nicole, it's very much an ensemble cast as well. And the actors that you were able to bring in for this, who some people may know and some people might not know, are all incredible. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Nicole, came to me with this project, so when I read the novel, I knew she was gonna play Margaret, and Nicole is such a strong presence on screen, and figuring out who the ensemble was gonna be, particularly because most of them were Asian American, and there are not a lot of Asian Americans who have her level of fame. And it was incredible that she, as well as Amazon, were so supportive in how I wanted to cast it. And there were these so many incredible actors who've been working as long as Nicole has been working, but just hasn't had those opportunities. Brian T, for example, Tokyo Drift and Chicago Med and Sorry You Blue, and who's done a lot of television and mostly on the comedy side. And I just really love, putting people into a role that we haven't seen them before. Sorry You is incredible in this dramatic role, but also just brings levity. And then we have Ji Young Yu, who is a newcomer. She's done a few films, but I think this is her first lead role. And then we also did a lot of casting in Hong Kong and in the Philippines. Ruby Ruiz, who plays Essie, as one of the domestic workers for Nicole's character, Margaret. She's really well known in the Philippines, but it's just wonderful to be able to cast internationally, and that felt authentic to this world where people are coming from all over the globe, coming together, and it just felt really right to have Nicole surrounded by Americans and British and Filipino actors, and we also had a lot of non-actors that we had cast locally. And so that was exciting to see, how to make sure the size of the performances at the end all felt of the same size and of the same world.
And that definitely comes across. I am going to throw it to audience questions. If you are able to stand and have a mic, please stand up and ask a question. We have mic runners, I believe. So over here, yeah.
Hi, thank you guys so much. It's been such an inspiring talk. I was wondering what both your shortlisting processes were for both the things, obviously Lulu, I wonder if you shortlisted before you shot everything or if you kind of had breaks in between, and Cord, being a new director, what your shortlisting process was like.
Yeah, the greatest thing the thing that I sort of set out to say to every single person who worked on the movie was, I said, listen, I've never done this before, so there is going to be a learning curve for me, and there's going to be times when I don't understand what you're talking about. And I understand that your job is hard enough, being a production designer, being a cinematographer, these are difficult jobs that require a lot of your mental energy and physical energy. And so if you don't want to do your job and also teach me sometimes, I get that. That's okay. It's okay to do that. And fortunately, everybody who signed on was willing to do that and willing to work with me on those terms. And so I got this really wonderful cinematographer named Christina Dunlap. You know Christina? Yeah, she's amazing. She's the first person I met with. I knew that I wanted to hire her within 5 minutes of meeting her. They made me meet 6 other cinematographers, all of whom were great, and I really liked them. But I knew Christina was my person as soon as I sort of walked into the room and met her. She can't be here, unfortunately. She just had a baby. She just had her first baby. Yeah, it's amazing. But so she sat down with me. There's this wonderful website called Shot Deck. I don't know if you know Shot Deck. Yeah, so I had never heard of Shot Deck. She gave me the password to her Shot Deck, and she was like, just go through here and look at stuff. So we just sat down and sort of spent a week or so just going through Shot Deck, sort of watching movies and sort of figuring out the vibe that we wanted and figuring out what our inspirations were. So we went through and shot listed the entire film before we actually started shooting on day one and had it all planned out through that.
I'm going to go over here this time.
Can I add one? I'm just going to add one thing, Jeff, because I just want to say that is the best way to approach directing, because I didn't go to film school. And so when I first started, I was the same exact way. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And a friend of mine said to me, who's a DP, said, the thing about directing is you just need to know what to say, and everyone else are your interpreters. But the way that if you say, I see the color green, that may not be the same shade of green, the same green that everyone else is seeing. And so it's all about that communication. And I am so envious of directors. I see one of them in the audience who just gets Barry. He gets in the he goes to set and he's able to figure it out. And my DP who's here today, Ana Franqueza Solano, woo. She and I have this process where we shot list everything to the T. We were joking last night that she has, because I play every character as a stand-in, and we use this app. What's the app called? Artemis. We use Artemis to shot list, and we photograph everything, and blocking and the whole thing. So we could edit the entire series with the Artemis videos that we did with me and our assistants as stand-ins for every single character. That's how specific we get. And then when we get to set, it's not, and I'm working on trying to be more open, where we're like, oh, if something needs to change on the day of, we should be open to that. But I have to say, you know, having that blueprint, and a lot of times we don't change those ideas. It really helps. Like our first AD had all those videos. And so it also helped him to schedule everything, and he knew exactly, you know, this shot, how many shots we were doing, how many setups we were doing that day, and for us, it really is incredible.
Amazing. I was going to go over here next.
Hello. Corda, I'm apologizing for bringing you back to the writer's room. I have a question about a novel adaptation and the author's role in all of it. So were the authors present in the writer's room? What are their roles in all of it? And do they like the films? Are they here at the festival? Thank you.
Yeah, Percival he told me that once that he had a very terrible television or experience with the first adaptation of one of his novels, because he said he wrote this, you know, I think it was one of his first novels, and they came to him and they were like, you know, we want to adapt this for television. He said, okay, let's think about it. And they were like, we got, our first note though would be, is it possible to make the lead character white? And he said, I would do that if literally every other character could be black. And they said, well, we can't do that. And so he said, okay, well then we're not going to do this. And it crashed and burned. And so he is very apprehensive, I think, about getting into film and TV again. He's a prolific novelist. I know he loves writing novels. He's also a painter. He does abstract, and he's also an equestrian. He owns a ranch and he breaks wild horses. He's truly the most fascinating man in the world. So I think that he was more than content to not be involved in the writing process. When I first, I called him and begged him to give me the rights, and he very sweetly gave them to me for free. And he said, "You just write the script, and if anything comes of it, then you can pay me then." And he's since become a really good friend. He saw the movie. He really enjoyed the movie. He gave me a compliment that was a high piece of praise for me. I don't know if I've said this in here already. Maybe I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But he said that the thing that he really liked about it was that it felt like it was like a piece of art unto itself. Like it felt like it was. He said that he appreciated that it felt like a separate thing from the novel, and that sort of like it was clearly inspired by the novel, but I made something of my own. And so, yeah, he's been a huge supporter. And he and I actually convinced him to get back into film and TV. We're going to try to co-write a movie together. So he and I are in talks right now about maybe writing a Western together. I love it.
Janice was in the writer's room, Janice Wyke-Haley. She was here at the festival, and she said something similar and very poetic. She said, the show feels like a cousin of the novel, which is that they're related and they're in the same family, but they're not directly the same.
Last question, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back over here on this side. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot about Burger King and knives. As filmmakers, what is something that you wish you had known prior to starting this journey that you do now?
I'm going to let Lulu take that one.
No, I was looking to you. I was like, I got time. He's going to answer first. I guess I would say that, I don't know if I wish I knew this earlier. I don't know how you can know it without just doing it and experiencing it, but directing is a lot more than just directing. You know, it's a lot more than just being on set. It's a lot more than just editing. It is navigating a lot of relationships, a lot of communication, and a lot of different hierarchies. You know, you're working with a studio system, you are working with financiers, you're working with a line producer who has to then report on those things. And Yeah, and so I think that there are a lot of politics to navigate. So I just think that I didn't necessarily know that coming into it, and I was like, I'm just an artist, and you just do the art, and but you know, like this, what you were saying, like the selling of it and the business of it, and all of that is part of your job, and I think that sometimes I fight that, you know, and then I have to go, okay, like that is part of the responsibility to everyone that's involved in the project, and it is your job and responsibility to the project itself.
And I think that I wish I would have known how much I was going to love it, and what I mean by that is I'm 41. I turned 42 in January, and I feel like I finally found my thing. I feel like I finally found the thing that I really, really want to do for the rest of my life, and I wish I would have known that 30 years ago, you know, because I feel like, you know, time is finite, and I, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this forever, and so I really wish I knew. I really wish I would have sort of like taken myself seriously as somebody who could make art earlier in my life, and I think that is. I grew up in a household where, you know, my dad's a lawyer, my mother was an educator, they both went to grad school, they sort of, all their friends were professionals, and so I, you know, when I was growing up, I loved movies, I loved TV, I loved art, I loved music, but to me, I didn't know anybody who made money creatively, who made money with art. And so I was growing up in Tucson, Arizona, and I felt like, oh, you know, people like me don't do that. Like, people who do that are in New York and LA, and sort of like you grew up in the industry and have parents who are producers and painters and creatives, and like I just assumed that I was going to go to law school eventually and just write on nights and weekends, maybe some short stories I could get into Reader's Digest or something, and that was going to be sort of my creative outlet. And it took me a very long time until I actually thought of myself as like, no, you can be an artist. You know, I didn't start working in television until I was 33, and I thought I was like, you know, I was the oldest person in the writer's room, and felt like I started way too late. But I've loved it, and I think that to me is, I wish I would have tried it years ago. I wish I would have tried it I wish I would have been making films in high school with my friends, because I've just loved it so much, and I would have loved to learn the stuff that I learned last year, decades ago. But it's okay. I think that things happen when they're supposed to happen, and I probably, if I had tried to make this movie when I was 21, it probably would have been terrible. And so it's good that I waited so long also. So, you know, you can't rush things, but yeah, I feel conflicted. I'm sorry. This is a non-answer.
Well, I think all of us here are so happy and thrilled that you both found your thing, because you're incredibly good at that thing, and we're incredibly honored to celebrate it here at TIFF. And I just want to give you both congratulations and a thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.